what we've been learning about for the past, 2-3 weeks? I think I was supposed to speak 3 weeks ago and we had a snowstorm. And then now, today, I don't know if you guys saw, there was like high wind advisories and like tornado warnings. I literally was like, am I about to not be able to speak again because of the weather? This is wild. But if you remember 2 weeks ago, who spoke? Anyone remember? He had a perm. Larry, right? And then last week, it was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? The perm? That's what I thought. Last week, who spoke? Jeremy. If you guys remember, Jeremy had Oscar holding that weighted vest, right? For like 20 minutes. He got a real, bicep pump. And who have we been learning about for these past few weeks? Not a good sign. Anyone, name me a dude in the Bible who starts with an A. We'll take it. That's it, Abraham. Right, exactly. So today we're going to talk about Abraham, but more specifically, I'm going to talk about how Abraham was tested. Does anyone know what it means to be tested? What do you think? Put through trial, hard times? Okay, that's good. What about like more generic? What do you think tested means? Like how many of you guys are in school? How many of you guys take tests? Right? Like, what does it mean? Like, what do you think the meaning of the word test means? Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, say it. Yeah, you use the word in the definition. That's not going to work. I'll allow it. She said testing means getting quizzed. I'll allow it. You didn't use the word. You want me to read you the definition? I'll read you the official definition of a test. A procedure intended to establish the quality, performance, or reliability of something, especially before it is taken into widespread use. You were so wrong. No, I'm just kidding. You were pretty close. Like you said, trials, right? It is a procedure to establish the quality, performance, and reliability of something. That's what it means to test. Testing is we need to push something through and find out where its breaking point is going to be, right? Everything gets tested. Everything. I work for a car manufacturer. You guys better be happy that we, at car manufacturers, test our cars before you go and drive them, right? Like back in the 1920s, 1930s, that wasn't a thing. You'd get behind the wheel. Sorry about your luck if you hit a tree. There's no safety there, right? ABS brakes, you don't know what any of this stuff is. But there's a lot of safety features. A couple people do. There's a lot of safety features that got tested before you guys go and get behind the wheel. How many of you guys are afraid of roller coasters? Are you afraid of them because you think you're going to die or you think you're going to break? That's my wife, Lindsay. She hates them, and that's why. We've ridden roller coasters together, and she's always afraid that she's going to be the one where it breaks and the car flies off into a tree and we die. It doesn't make sense. Those rides and those roller coasters are tested ridiculously. They were designed by an engineer inside CAD where he tested the strength and everything and the physics of it. And then it gets sent out and it gets tested for the strength of the actual steel in the assembly plant, right? And then it gets built. And then it gets tested. Have you guys ever been to Cedar Point when they're testing a ride? They've got these, they're like buckets that are shaped kind of like a human, about this tall. They fill them with sand or water. And they put all of those things inside like Millennium Force. When they're testing it out, they put a bunch of these sand things inside the roller coaster, and then no humans are on it, and they're like, all right, go. And they will see if Millennium Force is going to stand up or not, or if that car is going to go off and hit a tree like Lindsay's always worried about. And finally, after it passed all those tests, they put humans on it, right? They've just got a new ride down at Disney World. That thing got tested for like 7 months before they let any humans go on it. That's kind of annoying, but I'm very, very glad they did it because I don't want to be the test dummy. I want something else to be the test dummy, right? They need to test it. That procedure needs to happen for them to find out what the reliability is. How many of you guys work out? Some sort. You play a sport, go to the gym, run, I don't know, whatever it is. Take gym class. If you want to know if you're getting better at something, how do you find out? Test it, right? This is for the bros, I guess, but if you want to bench 225, you don't just throw 225 on and just, hey, there it is. You got to start off at 135 and push yourself and break down the muscles and build the muscle back up, right? You have to keep on testing it until finally one day you put 2 bills on there and you go, holy smokes, I just did it, right? but you had to test yourself in order to find out. I do I don't even know what to call it a sport. I do CrossFit, I guess. And every year they have this thing called the CrossFit Open. And it's literally just to test yourself, to see if you got more fit from last year. That's all it is. And they suck, dude. These workouts are terrible. We just did one on Friday. I may have been like in the same percentile with like 85-year-old women. It was so bad. I suck at burpees. But you do it so you can find out, man, it was really, really hard to do, but I'm glad I did it because I tested myself to find out, am I ready to do more? And apparently, I'm not, right? Your guys' teachers test you in school. You can't just show up to school and know calculus, right? You had to learn it. You had to take a test to see if you actually know what they're teaching, right? Everyone understanding how this works? Our faith is the same thing. We have to get tested if we want to strengthen it. If we're not testing our faith, can we sit there and say we've got a strong faith? We can say it all day, but is it true? Is it true if we're not truly getting tested on a regular basis? I think that a lot of times we look at trials and tests as mean things, right? Like if God's testing you on something, he's putting you through a really, really hard time, we might go, man, what did I do wrong? Why am I getting tested in this, It's super easy. I think if you guys were at winter camp, I talked about, with my kid, Titus. And I'm like, man, how come all these bad things are happening and they don't seem to be happening for everyone else that I know doesn't go to church? And I was getting really, really frustrated with it. My faith was being tested, and I was like, man, what a mean God, right, to do this. That's not it at all. If you're not getting tested, if you're not getting put through situations where your faith is, you're going to have to walk more in faith and strengthen it and see, all right, you say you got faith, but do you really? If you're not seeing those situations, the question I would ask you is, why? Why aren't you seeing these tests? I guess the analogy I would use is, if you're not on the soccer team, you're not going to get tested in practice for the soccer team. Make sense? Like, if you're not in math class, you're not going to take the math test. If you're not walking in faith, you're not going to get tested in your faith. So we should be looking at those moments, honestly, as like almost like a badge of honor. Like, this is a test, and I'm going to push through, and I'm going to see exactly what I'm made of. Do you have the verse from James? Is that Braden back there? Evan? I can't tell who it is. James 1:2-4. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Go back to verse 3, would you please? Back one slide. There we go. Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Man, if you are a Christian, if you are a follower of Christ, you got to have some endurance in this life. Dude, you're going to go through some hard stuff. The enemy hates the fact that you follow Christ, hates the fact that you preach Christ to your friends, that you're trying to actively tell people about Jesus. And so you're going to go through some bad situations. And that's going to require endurance. I am not very good at endurance in general. Mental endurance. Billy literally texted me today. All it said was, "You're soft." Thanks, coach. It's 100% what it said. He said, "You're soft." I'm like, I wasn't even trying to do anything like that. He just threw out shots. He's not wrong, though. I'm smart, but I've just no mental endurance, no grit. Same thing when it comes to the burpees, right? I'm not good at that. And I'm like, man, I don't want that to translate over into my walk with Christ. And obviously you can see when I was talking about Titus, dude, I was not in a good place in that moment. When I thought that kid, multiple times I thought Lindsay was having another miscarriage. And then he finally is here, and I'm like, oh, we got this healthy kid. And then I find out he might have a genetic thing, right? Like, that was a test of my faith, and I was failing until Wes challenged me that night on his porch. And he's like, dude, people are watching you, right? Those are the moments where you're like, ooh, I guess I didn't have the endurance. I got tested, and I did not pass with flying colors in that moment. Can you show 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27? Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. But I discipline my body and I make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. I discipline my body and make it my slave. That is testing, right? That in order to discipline your body, and if you guys all do some kind of activity, if you want to get better at it, you got to push your body to the limit, right? How many of you guys run like cross country or track? Dude, I ran track in college. It sucks. In order to get faster, what do you have to do? Running. That's every other sport's punishment, right? It's like the worst thing ever. But you have to do it. I remember multiple times in college track, about to get detailed, one of the worst workouts I've ever had in my entire life was we had to do 200 repeaters. And like 200 was the furthest I ever ran. Dude, I never even ran a 400, I never ran the mile, I didn't do any of that. I was a sprinter. So I remember we had to run 200 repeaters, which was, for those of you that don't know, a track is 400 meters around, right, the whole oval. So the goal was you had to run your 200. And you had to run it, you take your PR, your fastest you've ever ran it, which was like 21 something. And so you add 2 seconds. And they're like, all right, you got to run one inside like 23.7 seconds. And if you didn't, it didn't count. But you had to run 8 of them. So you get to the end, and you had the next 200 meters to walk back to the start and then run another one. And if that one wasn't, within 2 seconds of your all-time PR, it didn't count. And you had to keep on doing that until you got 8 of them within those 2 seconds. I got done with that workout, went over to a fence, threw up everything I'd eaten that day, probably the day before that, and I was probably throwing up stuff from like a week ago. I remember walking, like legs shaking, walking across the field, got back to my dorm, and I remember laying on the floor of my dorm, which was on the bottom floor, the whatever main floor, so it was concrete, not wood. And I remember just laying there. You guys have never been in sports practice, you know what I'm talking about, where you're just like still trying to catch your breath, and you're like, if I turn my head left or right, I'm probably gonna get sick again, right? So you're just staring, don't move, and you had to lay there for like 20, 30 minutes until you were finally like, I think I can slowly get myself off the ground right now. Like that happens to me a lot now at CrossFit, but like that day was ridiculous. I beat my body into submission that day. And you know what? It worked out really, really well because I started running even faster after that. That's what they're talking about. You discipline my body and make it my slave. But that's not 100% what he's talking about in this, right? He's using that as an example. He's talking about our walks. He's talking about our faith. The way that I was pushing myself on those stupid 200s is what we should be doing in our faith. Constantly challenging ourselves because we're going to get tested. And the only way we're going to have that endurance to get through those situations is if we are challenged with situations prior to getting to the big one. That makes sense to everyone? And now you're probably sitting here like, okay, how do I pass the tests? We're going to face tests. How do we pass them? That's obeying. You pass the test by obeying his commandments, by obeying what he said, by having faith and not losing hope. It says in, John 14:15. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I mean, it's as simple as that, and yet it's still super, super, super hard. Right? That's such a simple verse to read, and you're like, okay, there's only 10 of them. Obviously, there's a couple more, but But it's super, super hard, especially when we're in the middle of a storm. When you're in the middle of, friends talking behind your back, bad grades, parents are going through a divorce, right? All these different situations that you're going to get tested with. Everything I just said was a test that I had to do when I was at your guys' age. My parents got divorced, and it was a major test. I remember going like, well, this isn't fair, God. Like, what in the world? Now I got to go like every other weekend and meet in a Burger King parking lot. I remember I just saw it the other day. I was on the phone with Lindsay, and I was at Target in Fenton. And in the back of the parking lot, I saw 2 cars next to each other. And out of the one car came this little girl with her backpack and her little duffel bag. And she went around and got in her mom's car. And I'm like, been there. Know exactly what that's like. Just spent the weekend at Dad's house. Now I'm going back with Mom. That's a test. That's a hard situation. I don't know if any of you guys are in here with divorced parents and that's what it's like, but that's not easy. That's way more challenging than looking around and seeing kids who just have great homes. Lindsay's parents are still married. I remember, I'm never jealous, but I was like sitting there on Christmas going, this is kind of nice. The whole family's at one. I don't have to like split time and like go to dad's side of the family and then mom's side of the family, or because they're both remarried. Like you get multiple presents, but that's besides the point, right? It was a hard test. It was a hard thing. And in those moments, I'm not thinking about, man, how am I going to keep my faith strong? How am I going to be able to talk to other people, who maybe are struggling with this? I was dealing with myself. I'm like, man, woe is me. Woe is me. This is the worst situation ever. What is wrong with me? There's other times where you can see in the Bible where people get tested. Jonah's a good example. Jonah gets tested by God. He says, hey, I want you to go to Nineveh and I want you to preach. And Jonah, probably the most magnificent way you could possibly fail a test, failed. Not only did he get a big F, that F stood for fish. And the dude got swallowed. You know what I mean? Like, that's the worst way you could possibly fail your test. Would be like, he didn't even just say like, I'll get there eventually. He was like, no, I'm gonna go 180 degrees the other direction. And God's like, no, you're about to get swallowed by a fish, which is a crazy way to go out. But he gets tested. I talked about at winter camp, Job. Job gets tested so many times. And every single time Job came through with flying colors. His faith was super strong, and God knew it. God knew, Satan, do your worst. You can't break this guy. I know his faith is that strong. I want God to say that about me. And we should all want God to say that about us. We should all be striving for in our own faith and our own walks. The people who pass the test, the people who show how strong their faith is. In the Bible, those are the people who walk on water. The people who part the sea. If you remember Larry 2 weeks ago was talking about his favorite verse. Those are the people whose faith moves mountains, right? Larry's license plate was mountain. It might still be mountain mover, right? Like, he's not kidding. That is his favorite verse. And that happens because of faith. And that comes through obedience. And now you guys are probably wondering, like, okay, Abraham was who we're all talking about. I want to tell you guys a quick story about arguably, now that I'm a parent, the worst test I could possibly imagine facing. Abraham, if you guys remember, actually, no, I think this was the week I was supposed to speak, wasn't it, Michael? Abraham and Sarah giving birth to Isaac, right? He's got a kid. Long story short, she was super old, had a kid. So he's got his son. He loves his son. I've got a son. I love my son. I've only loved my son for 6 months. He loved his son for years because his son was able to climb a mountain with him. Well, it says in Genesis 22, I think is where I've got these verses. You have those verses? Yeah, you do. Perfect. Now, it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. That is the worst possible test I could imagine. Dude, give me divorced parents 3 times, 4 times over. I can't imagine the test being, hey, take your son and go offer him up as a burnt offering. Like, you guys don't have kids, you will someday. That hit me when I was a kid, and now having a kid, it's unbelievable. My kid, he last night got his first ever fever. He had a fever like 101 something. Lindsay and I are very different. Lindsay, she had to do worship at the women's group, and we found out he had a fever just before she leaves. And you could see inside, she's like, I don't want to go to church, but I have a job to do. And so she came home. As soon as she was done with worship, she didn't even stay for women's group. She came home because she's super worried. She's holding him. She's like, I don't want him to feel bad. She's crying. And I'm like, I feel bad for him, but dude's still jumping around in his bouncy seat and he's happy. He just doesn't feel good. But Lindsay's love for that kid, Alex is back there right now with Ted. Alex, I can't even imagine. You love Ted more than anything. Imagine God says, dude, kill that kid. Take him up this mountain, burn him for me. That's crazy. That doesn't even make sense. Dude, Lindsay would kill me before I'd even get my hands on Titus in that situation, right? But like, he did it. Abraham did it. He started to do it. Hear me out. He followed through. He takes his kid up the mountain, gets the offering ready. At some point, Isaac goes, hey, what are we offering up here? And Abraham had to like look at him and go, it's you, dude, right? God intervenes and says, you don't have to do this. But he was testing Abraham and testing his faith to see, you say you love me, you say you follow me, you say you've got faith. Let's find out how far this faith actually is. Are you willing to sacrifice, I would argue, his number one love in his life, which was the son he always wanted? Are you willing to sacrifice that? And Abraham showed that he was willing to. That's an example of what God did. Except God actually followed through with that offering, right? He was testing Abraham to see, is your faith strong enough? Is your faith strong enough? He sees that it is, and he goes, all right, you don't need to kill your kid now. But with Jesus, God offers up his son as a sacrifice for all of us so that we can go to heaven. That's so crazy. So crazy. I was talking to Lindsay earlier about this, and I'm like, you know what's wild about that is I'm not trying to minimize what Abraham did, because obviously that's an insane situation to be put in. He was offering up, it was him and his kid, and he was going to offer up his son as a burnt offering to God, the creator of the universe, right? If you were going to die as a sacrifice, I feel like that's the one way you'd probably be a little bit more okay with doing it. Does that make sense, everyone? Like, okay, that seems like a worthy cause to do it. God offers up his son to die on the cross for not only you and me, but rapists, pedophiles, murderers, Hitler, right? Like, God sacrificed his kid for all of these people, which to me would be an even harder decision to try and make. Imagine if God told Abraham, hey, sacrifice your kid for these criminals, for these super bad sinners, right? Like, that would be wild to me. And that's exactly what God did. God offered up his son as a sacrifice for all of us. Easily the biggest sacrifice. And like I said about Abraham, like, now that I have a kid, it hits different. So does Christ dying on the cross. It is the most, you guys saw what happened to Jeremy last week. He was literally bawling his eyes out just talking about what happened in the crucifixion. It is not just, hey, here's a burnt offering. It's, let's go ahead and give the most terrible possible torture you could give to a human. I'm going to put my son through that because I love us, love you guys, love me. He put his son through that willingly for us. That's insane. It doesn't make sense. I can't. As a kid, I grew up, you hear about it, right? But it's hard to comprehend just how much he loves all of us to put his own kid through that. Right? Like, we do, some states do lethal injection, right? It's like relatively pain-free. It's more mentally scary that it actually inject them, they die. Imagine if the US government in Texas was allowed to crucify people the same way. Are you kidding me? Twitter would literally shut that down. There'd be so many people getting canceled because of how they were treating these prisoners. And he willingly let his son die like that. That's crazy. But that's what all of us have to live up to, right? He died on that cross for our salvation so that we could have faith in him. So the question I've got for all of us is, when we get tested, are we going to choose to obey and pass these tests? Are we going to be Jonah? Or are we going to be the disciples walking on water, feeding the 5,000, right? Parting of the Red Sea. Like, how strong is our faith? We're going to get tested. If you call yourself a Christian, you're going to get tested. It's going to happen. You may already be in the middle of a trial right now. And my question is, how strong is your faith in Christ? Do you truly believe that he died on that cross for you? Or do you think it's just a story you heard in Sunday school? Because if it's just a story you heard in Sunday school, that endurance is not going to be there, right? Your rock, your foundation, your belief is not going to be solid enough for you to get through those trials. If you want to have that kind of grit and tenacity with your walk, you got to make sure you understand exactly what Christ did, exactly what that sacrifice was, exactly what Abraham, when he was willing to sacrifice his kid Isaac, that was a representation of what God did with Christ, and we need to all understand that's what it was, so that I can have these trials and tribulations, and I can still pass with flying colors. Guys, I'd like to tell you being a Christian is super, super easy, and you never, once you become a Christian, life's great. Lots of money in your bank account, kids are all perfect, straight A students. Like, that's just not what it is. We're going to get put through the ringer. And I hope and pray that all of you guys, I hope myself included, that we can pass these tests just like Abraham did. No matter what the challenge is, I hope that we can all work through this and have faith and be obedient to the Lord and come out the other side. Let's pray. Lord, just thank you for everyone in here. Just thank you for the warm weather. Just thank you for the opportunity to come up here and just to speak and talk about just the insane sacrifice that Abraham was willing to do. Lord, we thank you so much for sacrificing your own son so that all of us could live eternally with you in heaven. Be with us now in our small groups and help us have a great rest of the night. In your name, amen.